The claiming rejection was where you went when your own blood had thrown you away. And as Seren stood among the forsaken women who had been cast out, abandoned or discarded by their packs, she didn't weep like the others. She didn't beg with her eyes. She simply stood there, hands folded, a long sleeve concealing the mark that had ruined her life, the crescent brand, the symbol of a bound witch whose magic had been sealed for crimes against the realm. The crowd whispered as they always did. What did that one do? Why does she hide her arm? What could be so terrible that even her own father put her here? They weren't wrong to wonder. Beneath the fabric lay her shame, her curse, the secret that had destroyed everything and taught Seren to expect nothing but rejection. She would not be chosen. She never was. Then the Lycan king arrived with his young son. Theron of Valdrin, beautiful and brutal, cold as the northern mountains, walked into the hall with his pup clutching his hand. The boy hadn't spoken in 6 months, hadn't smiled, hadn't shown interest in anything since his mother's death. But the moment the child's eyes found Seren across the crowded hall, he tore free from his father's grip and ran. Past noblewomen, past officials. Straight to the woman no one wanted. He wrapped his small arms around her leg and spoke his first word in half a year. Mine. The hall erupted in chaos. The king stood frozen, staring at his son, then at the unknown woman his child had claimed. Seren would later learn the terms of her strange salvation. She could stay. She could care for the pup. The king would even marry her if necessary to keep his son calm. But under one condition that would never bend. He would never love her. Neither of them understood how impossible that vow would be. The women had been arranged along the stone wall like goods awaiting inspection. For today, the great hall of Valdrin held no celebration, no feast, and no triumph. It held a claiming rejection. This was where wolves came when all other paths had closed, when their intended mates had cast them aside, when their packs had deemed them unworthy, too broken, too shameful to keep. Unclaimed wolves disturbed the natural order. They couldn't remain packless forever. Hence, the rejections were made public, and the rejected were offered one final chance to be claimed by anyone willing to take them. The men who attended these gatherings weren't seeking true mates. They sought servants, bed warmers, nursemaids for their pups. Convenient arrangements. Nothing more. The crowd that had gathered today was sparse, the interested parties fewer than in previous seasons. The officiant droned through names and histories with all the enthusiasm of someone reciting a list of the deceased. One woman sobbed quietly, her shoulders shaking with the effort of holding herself together. She'd been rejected 3 days before her wedding. The shame of it still clung to her like smoke. Another stood rigid, jaw clenched, a jagged scar running down the length of her neck. Someone had tried to claim her by force once. She'd refused. Now she was here, paying for that refusal with her dignity. A third woman stared at nothing, her hand resting on her swollen belly. Pregnant and abandoned. The father had chosen a younger, prettier wolf from a wealthier pack. But it was the last figure in the line who drew the most attention. She wasn't remarkable at first glance. Average height, brown hair that fell past her shoulders in simple waves, a face that might have been pretty if it weren't so carefully blank. But it was her stillness that unsettled the crowd. Every other woman fidgeted, wept, or bristled with defiance. This one simply stood, calm, resigned, as if she'd already accepted whatever fate awaited her. "What's wrong with that one?" a merchant muttered to his companion, nodding toward her. "She looks like she's already dead inside." The whispers rippled outward. Why was she here? What had she done? The officiant hadn't even read her history aloud, which meant either her crimes were too shameful to speak publicly, or someone had paid to keep them quiet. Beneath her sleeve, hidden from every eye in the hall, Seren felt the crescent brand pulse with phantom heat. It didn't actually burn anymore. The binding had sealed her magic years ago, but she could still feel its presence, like a scar that ached before a storm. This was it. The end of the road her father had paved for her. Lord Rendell stood near the back of the hall, arms crossed, watching with barely concealed satisfaction. Her sister Marenne stood beside him, beautiful in blue silk, refusing to look in Seren's direction. Pretending, as always, that Seren didn't exist. If no one claimed her today, her father would be within his legal rights to sell her to the northern mines. Wolves who worked those tunnels rarely survived more than a few years. The cold, the darkness, the back-breaking labor. It was a death sentence wrapped in paperwork. Rendell was counting on that. He wanted her gone. He'd wanted it since the day her magic had first manifested, since the day he'd looked at his youngest daughter and seen nothing but the evidence of his wife's supposed betrayal. Moonfire blood. He'd spat at her when she was 13, watching silver flames dance unbidden from her fingertips. Your mother spread her legs for a warlock, and you're the proof. It wasn't true. Seren had never believed it was true. But her mother was dead now, banished and broken, and there was no one left to defend her memory. The efficient moved down the line, and Seren forced herself to breathe. No one would claim her. She knew this. She'd made peace with it during the long carriage ride to Valdrin's capital. She would be sold to the mines. She would work until her body gave out. And she would die, without ever knowing what it felt like to be wanted. That was her fate. She'd accepted it. Then the great doors exploded open. Every head turned. Every whisper died. A presence rolled into the hall like a winter storm descending from the mountains, and Seren felt it in her bones before she saw him. Alpha power. Not the ordinary dominance of a pack leader. This was something older. Deeper. The kind of authority that came from bloodlines so ancient they predated the first written histories. The king! Someone gasped. Gods above, why's the Lycan king here? Theron of Valdrin walked into the hall as if the stones themselves recognized his right to rule them. He was tall, taller than any man present, with dark hair that fell to his shoulders and eyes the color of a frozen lake. Pale blue, almost silver in the torchlight. But it wasn't his height or his beauty that made the crowd shrink back. It was the cold. Even from across the hall, Seren could feel it radiating from him. A chill that shouldn't exist in a living body. Lycans ran hot. Everyone knew this. Alphas especially burned like furnaces, but this king felt like winter given form. At his side, clutching his hand with white-knuckled fingers, was a small boy. 4 years old, perhaps 5. Dark hair like his father's. Eyes that stared at the ground, vacant and hollow. The pup hadn't spoken in 6 months. The rumors had reached even Seren's isolated corner of the realm. Since the queen's death in childbirth, the young prince had retreated into silence. He didn't play, didn't laugh, didn't respond to his name. Healers had been summoned from every corner of the kingdom. None could help. The child was lost inside his own grief, and the king was slowly losing his mind watching it happen. So why bring him here? To this hall of broken women and shattered hopes? The officiant stumbled over himself to bow. Your Majesty, we are honored beyond measure. Had we known you intended to attend, we would have prepared. Continue, Theron said. His voice matched his presence. Cold, controlled, empty of warmth. The officiant blinked. Your Majesty? I said continue. Don't stop on my account. The king began walking toward the line of women, and the crowd parted like water before a blade. His son walked beside him, still staring at nothing, still silent. Seren kept her eyes forward. She would not look at him, would not hope. Hope was a poison she'd purged from her system years ago. She heard his footsteps pause at the first woman, the one who'd been sobbing. A long silence. The footsteps moved on. Another pause. The scarred woman, perhaps. Dismissal. He continued down the line, and with each step, Seren's pulse quickened. Closer. Closer. The temperature dropped as he approached, that unnatural cold seeping into her skin. Then the footsteps stopped. Not in front of her. 3 women away. Seren should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something else entirely. A strange pulling sensation, like an invisible thread tugging at her chest. She ignored it. It meant nothing. And then the child screamed. Not a scream of fear. A scream of recognition. Of desperate, aching need. The little prince tore free from his father's grip and ran, past the sobbing woman, past the scarred woman, past the pregnant woman, directly to Seren. He slammed into her legs with enough force to make her stumble, his small arms wrapping around her thighs, his face pressing into her skirt. And from his mouth came a word that shattered 6 months of silence. Mine. The hall went absolutely still. Seren stood frozen, staring down at the dark head of hair pressed against her body. Her hands hovered uselessly in the air, afraid to touch him, afraid to breathe. Mine, the boy said again, his voice muffled by fabric. Mine, mine, mine. Slowly, dreading what she would find, Seren lifted her eyes. The Lycan king stood 5 feet away, staring at his son with an expression she couldn't read. Shock, perhaps, or horror, or something else entirely, something that looked almost like fear. Their eyes met. Seren expected fury, expected accusation, expected him to rip his child away from her and demand to know what witchcraft she'd used to enchant him. Instead, the king's gaze moved over her face with cold assessment, taking her measure, weighing her worth. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was quiet, controlled. But beneath it she heard something fracturing. "Seren," she managed. "My name is Seren." "Seren." He repeated it like he was tasting the word. "My son hasn't spoken in 6 months, hasn't touched anyone willingly since his mother died. And now he runs to you, a stranger, and claims you as his." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "I don't know why, Your Majesty. I've never seen him before. I would never—" "She's a witch!" Lord Rendell's voice cut through the hall like a blade. Her father pushed through the crowd, his face twisted with righteous fury. "Your Majesty, I must warn you. That woman is dangerous. She was bound for crimes against—" "Be silent." The king didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The words carried an alpha command that made Seren's knees buckle, and her father's mouth snap shut mid-sentence. Theron looked at her for a long, terrible moment. Then he looked at his son, still clinging to her legs, still murmuring mine like a prayer. When the king spoke again, his voice was ice and iron, and something that might have been desperation. "She stays." The carriage moved through the castle gates as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. Through the small window, Seren watched the towers of Valdrin's royal fortress rise against the darkening horizon like teeth. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, something dangerous. Relief. Her father's face when the king had claimed her, when guards had escorted her away from the rejection hall, when Lord Rendell's protests had been silenced with a single cold look. That expression of thwarted rage would sustain her for years. But relief was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not yet. Not until she understood what was happening. The young prince, Emmerich, sat beside her on the velvet seat. He hadn't released her hand since the king's guards had helped them into the carriage. His small fingers were warm against hers, and every few moments he would look up at her with those hollow eyes and say that word again. Mine. Seren didn't know how to respond. She'd never spent time with children, had never been allowed to. Bound witches weren't permitted near pups. Too dangerous, the laws said. Too unpredictable. But Emmerich didn't seem to care about laws. He pressed against her side like a small furnace, and gradually his trembling eased. By the time the carriage stopped, he was almost peaceful. "We've arrived, my lady," the guard announced, opening the door. "My lady." Sarah nearly laughed. No one had called her that since before her binding, since before her mother's banishment, since before her entire life had crumbled into ash. She stepped down onto smooth cobblestones, Emmeric's hand still clutched in hers. The castle loomed above them, impossibly vast, impossibly grand. Torches flickered in iron sconces. Servants in royal livery bowed as she passed. No one sneered at her. No one whispered "witch" under their breath. It was so different from her father's house that she felt dizzy. "This way, my lady," a steward said, gesturing toward a set of massive oak doors. "The king will see you now." Seren's stomach dropped. Of course he would. Of course there would be questions, demands, perhaps punishment once he learned the truth about what she was. She knelt before Emmerich, meeting his eyes for the first time properly. Up close, she could see traces of his mother in his features, the shape of his mouth, the slight upturn of his nose. "I have to speak with your father now," she said gently. "Will you go with the nice servants? They'll take you somewhere warm." Emmerich's grip tightened. His eyes, which had been vacant for so long, suddenly blazed with fierce determination. "No. Mine. Emmerich. He hasn't left anyone's side willingly since the Queen's passing," the steward said quietly. "Perhaps it would be best if he accompanied you. His Majesty may wish to see this for himself." So Seren walked through the castle corridors with the prince attached to her hand, following the steward through hallways that seemed to stretch forever. Tapestries depicted great battles. Portraits of ancient kings stared down at her with cold, judging eyes. They stopped before a heavy wooden door. The steward knocked twice. "Enter," came the king's voice from within. The study was warm despite the cold that radiated from its occupant. A fire burned in the hearth. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, maps and documents covered a massive desk. And standing beside the window, silhouetted against the dying light, was Theron of Valdrin. He turned as they entered, and Seren's breath caught. In the torchlight of the rejection hall, he'd been striking. Here, in the intimate glow of firelight, he was devastating. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw that looked carved from marble, and those pale, piercing eyes that seemed to see straight through her. But it was the cold that made her shiver. Even with the fire roaring, the temperature dropped several degrees in his presence. "Leave us," Theron said to the steward. The door closed with a soft click. Seren dropped into a curtsy, pulling Emmerich gently down beside her. "Your Majesty." "Rise." She straightened, her chest tight with anxiety. Through her peripheral vision, she saw Emmerich staring at his father with an expression she couldn't quite read. Not fear, not affection, something else. Recognition, perhaps, as if the child was seeing something no one else could see. "Your Majesty," Seren began, her voice barely steady. "I must explain. I never intended to bewitch your son. I don't know why he reacted to me the way he did. My magic has been bound for years. I couldn't have... I know what you are." The statement hung in the air, flat and cold. Seren's blood turned to ice. "Your Majesty?" "A bound moonfire witch." Theron's gaze moved to her left arm, where the crescent brand lay hidden beneath her sleeve. "Accused of killing a nobleman with uncontrolled magic. Branded and sealed by your own father when you were 13 years old." He knew. He already knew everything. Seren's hands trembled at her sides. "Then you understand why I cannot possibly be responsible for your son's behavior. My magic is gone, sealed. I couldn't enchant a flower, let alone a child." "I know." She blinked. "You... know?" Theron moved away from the window, and the cold intensified as he approached. 3 feet away. 2. He stopped close enough that she could see the individual threads of silver in his pale blue eyes. "Moonfire witches don't work through enchantment," he said quietly. "Their magic is lunar, celestial. It has nothing to do with influence or manipulation." He tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Whatever my son sees in you, it isn't a spell." Seren didn't know what to say. She'd spent years bracing for disgust, for hatred, for fear. She'd never prepared for acceptance. Then why am I here, Your Majesty? Theron looked down at his son, still clutching Seren's hand, still pressed against her side. His composure faltered for just a moment. She saw the devastation beneath, the grief of a father watching his child disappear inside himself, powerless to stop it. Then the mask returned. You will stay in the castle, Theron said. You will care for Emmerich. You will be his nursemaid, his companion, whatever he needs you to be. He paused. I will provide you with comfortable quarters, appropriate clothing, servants who will respect your privacy, a generous allowance. You will want for nothing. Seren's head spun. This was too much, too fast. Your Majesty, I'm honored, but surely there are more qualified candidates. Women of noble birth who know how to raise a prince. My son chose you. The words came out hard, final. For 6 months I've watched him fade away, watched him become a ghost in his own body. Healers, mystics, priestesses, none of them could reach him. His jaw tightened, and then you walk into a rejection hall, and he speaks for the first time since his mother died. Seren looked down at Emmerich. He was watching his father now, those dark eyes following the king's movements with an intensity that seemed too old for his small face. I don't pretend to understand why, Theron continued, but I am not fool enough to ignore it. You will stay. You will care for him. And in exchange, I will ensure your father never touches you again. Her breath caught. Your Majesty, there is one condition. Of course there was. Seren steeled herself. Theron's voice dropped, becoming something closer to a confession than a command. My son has already lost his mother. He cannot afford to become attached to someone who will leave him. If you accept this arrangement, you will remain in my household permanently. There will be no temporary service, no trial period. He paused, and something dark moved behind his eyes. To ensure this, I will marry you. Everything she thought she knew crumbled around her. What? Seren breathed. A political marriage. Contractual. It will give you legal protection and ensure that your father cannot reclaim you or sell you to the mines. His tone remained perfectly flat, as if he were discussing trade agreements rather than binding himself to a branded witch. But I want to be clear about what this arrangement is and what it is not. He stepped closer, and the cold wrapped around her like chains. You will be my wife, in name only. You will have a title, a crown, everything that comes with queenship. But you will never be my mate. I will never claim you. I will never mark you. His eyes locked onto hers, and she saw something terrible in their depths. And I will never love you. Seren's heart cracked. Not because she wanted his love. She didn't know him. She didn't expect anything from him. It cracked because she recognized the devastation in his voice. This wasn't cruelty. This was protection. He was warning her away from something, shielding her from something. But from what? Do you understand? Theron asked quietly. Seren looked at the cold king with his frozen eyes. She looked at the small boy still holding her hand, the first person in years who had looked at her and seen something worth wanting. She thought of her father's rage, the mines, a slow death in darkness, and she thought of the life being offered to her now. Safety, protection, purpose. A child who needed her. What did it matter if she was never loved? She'd never been loved before. At least here, she might be useful. At least here, she might matter to someone. Yes, Your Majesty, she said clearly. I understand. I accept your terms. His expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion. You accept, he repeated slowly. Just like that. Without negotiation, without demands. What would I negotiate for? You're offering me everything I could possibly need. I'm offering you a loveless marriage to a man who will never let you into his heart. Seren met his gaze without flinching. With respect, Your Majesty, that's more than my own family ever offered me. You're giving me safety, purpose, and a child who apparently needs me." She glanced down at Emmerich, whose grip on her hand had tightened. "That's not nothing. That's more than I ever expected." Theron stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped back, and some of the cold receded with him. "Very well. The formal contract will be drawn up tomorrow. The wedding will take place within the week." He moved toward his desk, dismissing her. "The steward will show you to your chambers. Emmerich will stay with you tonight." Seren curtsied. "Thank you, Your Majesty." She turned to leave, Emmerich's hand still in hers. "Seren." She paused at the door. "My son sees things that others cannot." Theron's voice was quiet, almost reluctant. "He always has. His mother believed it was a gift. I'm not so certain." A pause. "But whatever he sees in you, I suggest you not disappoint him." It sounded like a warning. It sounded like a threat. But beneath both, Seren heard something else. Something that sounded almost like hope. She left without answering, her mind spinning and her pulse racing. She didn't notice until she was halfway down the corridor that her hands were shaking. And it wasn't until she reached her chambers, Emmerich finally asleep in a bed beside her own, that she allowed herself to process what had just happened. She was going to be queen. Queen to a king who radiated cold like winter itself. Who had explicitly forbidden love? Who looked at her with eyes that held secrets she couldn't begin to fathom? What was he hiding? What was wrong with him? Why did his very presence make the temperature drop? And why, despite every warning, did some part of her want to find out? The morning came too quickly. Seren had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the king's face, heard his voice. "I will never love you." The words should have stung. Instead, they felt like a key turning in a lock. A door opening to a life she'd never dared imagine. Safety, security, purpose. No love, but no cruelty either. She could live with that. Emmerich woke with the sunrise, and for a long, disorienting moment, Seren forgot where she was. The bed was too soft. The room was too warm. The small body pressed against her side was too trusting. Then memory returned, and she found herself staring at the ceiling of her new chambers, marveling at how completely her world had shifted in a single day. "Hungry," Emmerich announced. He was looking at her with those dark, knowing eyes, still quiet, still watchful, but there was color in his cheeks now. Life, where there had been none before. "Then let's find you some breakfast," Seren said softly. The servants who arrived to help her dress were discreet and professional. They didn't stare at her branded arm when she changed, didn't whisper about witches or curses. They simply did their jobs with quiet efficiency. "We have servants trained to assist with sensitive situations," one of them explained gently when Seren tensed during dressing. "His Majesty informed us that your privacy is to be respected absolutely." It was such a stark contrast to her father's household that Seren felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away. "The king has requested your presence in the council chamber," another servant informed her. "The marriage contract is ready for review." Seren's stomach tightened. Of course, the contract. This would be where the true terms were laid out, where she learned exactly what she was agreeing to, where her father would likely make one final attempt to stop this arrangement. She dressed carefully in the gown the servants had provided, a deep blue silk that was finer than anything she'd ever worn. Emmerich clutched her hand as they walked through the corridors, his small legs pumping to keep pace with her longer strides. "The council chamber, my lady," a guard announced, pushing open a set of massive double doors. The room was larger than Seren expected. A long table dominated the space with tall windows behind it letting in cold morning light. Maps of Valdrin covered the walls. Chairs lined both sides of the table, occupied by men in formal dress. The King's Council. Witnesses to the contract. And at the head of the table, radiating that impossible cold, sat Theron. He looked different in daylight, sharper, more severe. The shadows under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept much either. But it was the figure at the far end of the table that made Seren's blood run cold. Lord Rendell. Her father sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. Beside him, looking uncomfortable and out of place, sat her sister Marin. "Please." Theron gestured to a chair near him. "Sit." Seren sat, pulling Emmerich onto her lap when he refused to let go of her hand. The council members watched her with varying degrees of curiosity and suspicion, but none spoke. "The marriage contract has been prepared according to my specifications," one of the advisors said, sliding a document across the table. "If your Majesty wishes, I can summarize the key terms." "That won't be necessary." Theron picked up the document, scanned it briefly, then set it down. "I'll explain them myself." He looked at Seren, and she felt the weight of his attention like a physical force. "The terms are as follows," he began. "First and most importantly, you will be my wife. You will hold the title of queen. You will have all the rights and privileges that accompany that position." Seren nodded slowly, waiting for the conditions. "However," Theron's voice hardened. "This marriage will be contractual only. We will not share chambers. We will not share a life beyond what is necessary for appearances. You will attend certain royal functions with me, state dinners, foreign visits, perhaps a dozen events per year. Nothing more." The advisors exchanged glances. One of them shifted uncomfortably. "Your primary duty," Theron continued, "will be the care of my son. You will be his mother in all ways that matter. You will raise him, educate him, and protect him." A pause. "You will love him as if he were your own." Seren's arms tightened around Emmerich. The boy looked up at her, and something in his expression made her throat close. "In exchange," Theron said, "I will provide you with everything you need: wealth, security, freedom to move about the kingdom as you please. Your father will have no claim on you, no authority over you. You will be untouchable." At the far end of the table, Lord Rendell's hands clenched into fists. "Is this agreeable to you?" Theron asked. Before Seren could answer, her father exploded. "Your Majesty, I must protest." Rendell surged forward in his seat, his face flushed with rage. "You don't understand what you're agreeing to. That woman is dangerous. She killed a man with her magic. She's unstable, uncontrollable. If you would only let me explain—" "Lord Rendell." Theron's voice cut through the tirade like a blade through silk. "I don't recall asking for your input." Rendell's mouth snapped shut, but his eyes blazed with hatred. "I am aware of your daughter's history," Theron continued coldly. "I am aware of the accusations against her. I am also aware that she was bound at 13 years old, which means any magic she possessed has been sealed for over a decade." He tilted his head slightly. "Unless you're suggesting she somehow committed murder without access to her abilities?" Silence crashed over the table. Rendell's face went pale. Your Majesty, that's not—" "Because if that's what you're suggesting," Theron pressed, his voice dropping to something dangerous, "then the crime would have been committed through mundane means, which would make it a matter for the courts, not the councils. And I've seen no evidence of any formal charges, no trial, no conviction." He leaned back in his chair. Only a father who seemed remarkably eager to sell his own daughter to the northern mines. Marin's head snapped toward their father, her expression shifting from discomfort to confusion to dawning horror. "Father," she breathed, "you said she confessed. You said she admitted to killing Eric." "She did," Rendell insisted, but his voice was weaker now, uncertain. "I never confessed to anything." Seren's voice was quiet but steady. "I told you I didn't know what happened that night. That I couldn't remember. You decided I was guilty before I even woke up." The council chamber had gone very still. Theron studied the exchange with those cold, calculating eyes, and Seren wondered how much he was cataloging for later use. "Regardless of the past," the king said finally, We are here to discuss the future. Lord Rendell, you will sign this contract as witness. You will relinquish all legal claim to your daughter, and then you will leave my castle and never contact her again unless she explicitly requests it. Rendell's jaw worked soundlessly. If you refuse, Theron added, his voice dropping even further, I will open a formal investigation into the death of Eric of Thornbury. I will subpoena records. I will interview witnesses. I will discover exactly what happened that night. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Are you certain you want that, Lord Rendell? Are you certain there's nothing in your own past that might come to light under such scrutiny? The color drained from Rendell's face entirely. For a long, terrible moment, no one moved. Then Seren's father reached for the quill. He signed his name with a hand that trembled with suppressed rage. He stood. He looked at Seren with pure loathing in his eyes. You'll regret this, he said quietly. When the king discovers what you really are, he'll throw you away just like I did. And there won't be anyone left to save you. Then he turned and walked out of the chamber. The silence he left behind was deafening. Theron broke it first. Lady Marin, will you be staying, or will you accompany your father? Marin hadn't moved. She was staring at the door her father had just exited through, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She swallowed hard. Your Majesty, may I have a moment with my sister, before I decide? Theron nodded once. You may use the antechamber. Don't keep her long, we have a contract to complete. The antechamber was small and cold, a bare stone room with a single window overlooking the courtyard. Marin stood with her back to Seren, arms wrapped around herself. Did you really not confess? Marin asked finally. Her voice was barely above a whisper. I told you, Seren said. I told you 100 times. I didn't know what happened. I woke up, and Eric was dead, and father was already calling me a murderer. But the fire. Marin turned to face her, and Seren was shocked to see tears on her sister's cheeks. It was moonfire. Silver flames. Only someone with your bloodline could have. My bloodline? Seren laughed bitterly. The bloodline father always said came from mother's affair. The bloodline that apparently makes me a monster. It didn't come from mother. Seren froze. What? Marin's face crumpled. I overheard father talking once, years ago. He didn't know I was listening. She pressed her hands to her eyes. Grandmother was a moonfire witch. Father's mother. Grandfather had her killed when he found out. The ground seemed to shift beneath her feet. That's not possible, Seren whispered. Father always said. Father lied. Marin's voice broke. About everything. About mother. About you. About where the magic came from. She looked at Seren with devastated eyes. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe Eric's death was your fault, because the alternative was. She didn't finish. She didn't have to. Seren felt like she was falling. Like the floor had dropped out from beneath her and she was plummeting into darkness. If the moonfire magic came from father's side, if mother had been innocent all along, if Seren's magic had been bound before Eric's death, sealed when she was 13 years old, then who killed Eric? Sister. Seren's voice came out strangled. If my magic was already bound when Eric died, then I couldn't have. I know. Marin was weeping now. I know. I'm sorry. I should have believed you. I should have questioned father. I should have. The door opened. A guard stood in the entrance, his expression apologetic. Forgive me, my ladies. The king is waiting. Seren looked at her sister. This woman who had hated her for years, who had blamed her for the death of the man she loved, who was now crying and apologizing and revealing truths that changed everything. Come back, Seren said quietly. After the contract is signed, we need to talk properly. Marin nodded, wiping her eyes. I will. I promise. Seren returned to the council chamber in a daze. She signed the contract without reading it. Watched the advisors add their signatures as witnesses. Felt Emmerich's warm weight on her lap as the document was sealed with wax and the king's signet ring. "It's done," Theron said. "The wedding will take place in 3 days." Seren nodded numbly. "Is something wrong?" Theron asked, and there was something in his voice that might have been concern. "You seem distracted." Seren looked at him, this cold king with his frozen eyes and his impossible secrets. "My sister told me something," she said slowly. "Something about my family, about where my magic really came from." Theron waited. "I think..." Seren swallowed hard. "I think my father may have done something terrible. Something far worse than abandoning me." His expression shifted. Interest, perhaps, or recognition. "Family secrets have a way of surfacing eventually," Theron said quietly. "Usually when we least expect them. Usually when they can do the most damage." He sounded like he was speaking from experience. Seren met his eyes, and for just a moment she saw past the ice, past the cold, into something raw and wounded beneath. "What secrets are you hiding, Your Majesty?" she wanted to ask. Instead, she said nothing. Some truths took time to uncover. She had the feeling she would learn his soon enough. The Cathedral of Valdrin was ancient. Its stone walls had witnessed the coronation of 17 kings, the burial of 12 queens, and countless marriages that had shaped the fate of nations. Today, it would witness something unprecedented. A bound witch becoming queen. Seren stood in a small antechamber off the main sanctuary, her hands trembling as handmaidens finished adjusting her gown. White silk embroidered with silver thread. A veil that fell past her shoulders, thin enough to see through but thick enough to obscure her features from a distance. She hadn't asked for the veil. Theron had provided it without explanation. "To give you privacy," he'd said when she questioned it. "The people will want to see their new queen. You don't have to show them everything." It was such a small kindness, such an unexpected consideration. She didn't know what to do with it. "The procession is ready, my lady," one of the handmaidens said softly. Seren nodded, her throat too tight for words. Through the antechamber door she could hear the murmur of hundreds of voices. Nobles from every corner of the kingdom had gathered to witness this union. Most of them had come out of curiosity. Who was this unknown woman the king had plucked from a rejection hall? What could possibly have compelled him to marry her? The whispers had been relentless for 3 days. "They say she's a witch. They say she murdered a man. They say the prince screamed when he saw her, and the king had no choice." None of the rumors were accurate. All of them were close enough to the truth to sting. The doors swung open. Seren walked forward. The cathedral stretched before her. Impossibly vast, impossibly grand. Stained glass windows cast colored light across stone floors worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. Candles flickered in iron sconces, thousands of them, filling the air with warmth and the scent of beeswax. And at the altar, waiting for her, stood the Lycan king. Theron wore black, as he always did. Formal robes that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, the sharp lines of his jaw. His dark hair was pulled back from his face, and his pale eyes tracked her progress down the aisle with an intensity that made her skin prickle. But it was Emmerich who made her chest ache. The young prince stood beside his father, dressed in miniature formal wear, his dark eyes fixed on Seren with fierce concentration. He hadn't wanted to let her out of his sight this morning. The servants had needed to physically carry him away so she could dress. Now, watching her approach, his small face broke into the first smile she'd ever seen from him. "Mine," he mouthed silently. Seren felt her eyes burn. She blinked the sensation away. The crowd's whispers intensified as she passed. "I can't see her face properly. Why is she veiled? What is she hiding?" Let them wonder, Seren thought. Let them speculate. As long as they never saw the brand on her arm, as long as they never learned the full truth of what she was, she could survive their curiosity. She reached the altar. Theron extended his hand. Seren took it. Cold. His skin was so cold, even through her gloves, like touching winter itself. "You came," he said quietly, for her ears alone. "Did you think I wouldn't?" A crack appeared in his mask. "I thought you might reconsider." "Most would." "I'm not most." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. The high priest began the ceremony, his voice echoing through the vast space. Seren barely heard the words. She was too aware of Theron's hand in hers, the cold seeping through her gloves, the weight of hundreds of eyes on her back. "Do you, Theron of Valdrin, Alpha King of the Northern Realm, take this woman as your wife, your queen, your bound companion?" "I do." His voice was steady, emotionless, as if he were agreeing to a trade agreement rather than a marriage. "And do you, Seren of House Rendell, take this man as your husband, your king, your bound companion?" Seren's breath caught. House Rendell. She was still being called by her father's name, still being tied to the man who had tried to destroy her. But after today, she would be something else entirely. "I do," she said clearly. The priest nodded. "Then, by the ancient laws of Valdrin, by the blessing of the moon goddess and the witnesses gathered here, I pronounce you—" "Wait!" A voice rang out from the crowd. Every head turned. Seren's blood ran cold. Lord Rendell stood in the aisle, his face twisted with righteous fury. He'd been banned from the ceremony. Guards should have stopped him at the doors, but somehow he'd gotten through. "This marriage cannot proceed," Rendell declared, his voice carrying through the cathedral. "The woman at that altar is a criminal, a bound witch, a murderer." He pointed at Seren with a shaking finger. "Show them your arm. Show them the brand that marks you for what you are." The whispers exploded into shocked murmurs. "A witch? Branded? Is it true?" Seren's hand went instinctively to her left arm, covering it as if she could hide the truth through will alone. Her pulse raced. This was it. This was where everything fell apart. She waited for Theron to step away from her, to demand proof, to look at her with the same disgust she'd seen in her father's eyes for years. Instead, the temperature in the cathedral plummeted. The candles flickered. Frost spread across the nearest windows. And when Theron spoke, his voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "Lord Rendall." One step forward. Two. The crowd scrambled backward, pressing against the pews to get away from the king's path. "You are forbidden from this ceremony," Theron said quietly. "You are forbidden from contacting your daughter. You are forbidden from setting foot in my castle." Another step. And yet, here you stand, interrupting my wedding, making accusations you cannot prove. Rendell's face had gone pale, but he held his ground. "I can prove them. Make her show her arm. Make her—" "I know about the brand." Silence crashed over the cathedral. "What?" Rendell breathed. "I've known since the rejection hall." Theron's voice was ice and iron. "I know she's a bound Moonfire witch. I know she was accused of killing a man named Eric of Thornbury. I know her magic was sealed when she was 13 years old." He tilted his head, those pale eyes boring into Rendell with terrifying intensity. "I also know that her magic was bound before Eric's death, which means she couldn't have killed him with Moonfire, which means someone else did." The color drained from Rendell's face entirely. "So here is what's going to happen," Theron continued, his voice dropping to something barely above a whisper. "You are going to turn around. You are going to walk out of my cathedral. And you are going to pray that I never find evidence of what I suspect. Because if I do—" He smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Seren had ever seen. "The northern mines will seem like a paradise compared to what I'll do to you." For a long, horrible moment, no one moved. Then Lord Rendell turned and fled. The doors slammed behind him, and the cathedral erupted in shocked murmurs. But Theron was already turning back to Seren, already taking her hand again, and already facing the priest as if nothing had happened. "Continue," he said. The priest stammered through the rest of the ceremony. The rings were exchanged, Theron's fingers cold against hers as he slid the band into place. The final words were spoken. "You may kiss your bride." The cathedral went silent, every eye fixed on them, waiting. Would he lift her veil? Would they finally see the mysterious queen's face? Her heart raced. She looked at Theron through the thin fabric, saw him studying her, considering. "Your Majesty," she whispered. "You don't have to." "Do you want me to lift it?" he asked quietly. "No," she admitted. "But tradition can wait." Before she could respond, Theron raised her hand to his lips. The kiss was gentle, formal. His mouth pressed against her knuckles through her glove, cold but soft. It lasted only a moment. But when he released her hand, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude. "My queen," he said, loud enough for the crowd to hear. And despite everything, the whispers, the accusations, the secret still lying heavy between them, Seren felt something warm bloom in her chest. She was safe. She was protected. She was, against all odds, wanted. The royal chambers were larger than Seren's entire childhood home. A massive bed dominated the space, draped in dark velvet and piled with furs. A fireplace took up most of one wall, flames crackling against the evening chill. Windows overlooked the castle gardens, where moonlight painted silver paths through the hedgerows. Seren stood in the center of the room, still wearing her wedding gown, trying to remember how to breathe. This was it. The wedding night. The consummation. The contract had been clear. She would give him heirs. That was part of the arrangement. She'd agreed to it willingly, understanding what it meant. But understanding and experiencing were very different things. A knock at the door made her jump. "Enter," she managed. Theron stepped inside, and the temperature dropped immediately. He'd changed from his formal robes into simpler clothing. Dark trousers, a white shirt unlaced at the throat. His hair was loose now, falling past his shoulders in dark waves. He looked less like a king and more like a man. Somehow, that made everything worse. "The servants have prepared Emmerich for bed," Theron said, closing the door behind him. "He asked for you. I told him you'd see him in the morning. Is he all right? Better than he's been in months?" Theron moved toward the fireplace, standing with his back to her. He smiled today, during the ceremony. "I haven't seen him smile since—" He didn't finish the sentence. Seren waited. "Since his mother died," Theron concluded quietly. 6 months ago. Complications during childbirth. The baby didn't survive either." Seren's chest tightened. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. You didn't know her. There's no reason for you to mourn." But there was something in his voice, a fracture in his composure, that told her he was still mourning, still bleeding from a wound that hadn't healed. "Your Majesty," Seren began carefully, "if you'd rather not. I mean, the consummation doesn't have to happen tonight. The contract said heirs, not—" "I'm aware of what the contract said." He turned to face her, and Seren's breath caught. His eyes were different in the firelight. Softer somehow. More human. The cold was still there, radiating from him like winter wind, but beneath it, she saw exhaustion, grief, loneliness. "I should tell you something," Theron said slowly, "before we proceed." Seren's stomach tightened. "What is it?" He moved toward her, stopping an arm's length away. This close, she could see the individual threads of silver in his pale eyes, could feel the cold rolling off him in waves. "My body runs cold," he said quietly. "You've noticed this. I have. It's not natural. Lycans run hot, alphas especially." His jaw tightened. "This is something else. Something I cannot fully explain. My skin will be cold to the touch, My presence will lower the temperature of any room I'm in. It's disconcerting for most people. Seren studied him, this man who radiated winter like a curse. Does it hurt? She asked. Theron blinked. What? Being cold. Does it hurt? For a long moment he said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost missed it. Yes. Sometimes. Seren nodded slowly. Then we'll keep the fire burning. His expression shifted. Surprise, perhaps, or confusion, before the mask slid back into place. You're not going to ask what's wrong with me. Would you tell me if I did? No. Then I won't waste either of our time. She met his eyes steadily. You have your secrets, Your Majesty. I have mine. Perhaps someday we'll trust each other enough to share them. Until then, I can live with cold. Theron stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. You continue to surprise me, he said finally. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet. He closed the distance between them, and Seren's breath caught. His hands came up slowly, giving her time to pull away, to protest. When she didn't, his fingers found the clasps of her gown. I'll be gentle, he murmured. Tell me if you want me to stop. The gown whispered down her body, pooling around her feet. Cold air raised goosebumps on her exposed skin, but the cold from his hands was different. Focused. Intentional. His fingers traced along her collarbone, feather light. Seren shivered. Cold? He asked. Yes, but it's all right. His hand stilled. Why? Because you're being careful with me. She looked up at him, at those pale eyes watching her so intently. No one's been careful with me in a very long time. Something cracked in his expression, a fissure in the ice that revealed the devastation beneath. Seren. Her name in his mouth sounded like a prayer, or a warning. Your Majesty. Theron. His voice was rough. When we're alone, call me Theron. Theron, she repeated, and he inhaled sharply, as if the sound of his name on her lips affected him more than he'd expected. His hands moved to her waist, pulling her closer. The cold of his chest against her bare skin made her gasp, but beneath it, she felt something else. A heartbeat. Strong and steady. Faster than it should be. He was affected by this too, she realized. He was just better at hiding it. I should warn you, Seren whispered, her hands finding his shoulders. I've never done this before. Theron went very still. Never? Never. Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Possessiveness, perhaps. Or hunger. Then I'll make sure your first time is worth remembering. He lifted her easily, carrying her toward the bed. The furs were soft beneath her back, and when his body covered hers, the contrast in temperature made her shiver uncontrollably. I'm sorry, he murmured against her throat. I know I'm cold. Stop apologizing. She pulled him closer, wrapping her arms around his neck. I'll warm you. He made a sound low in his chest. Surprise, maybe, or pleasure, and then his mouth found hers. The kiss started gentle, exploratory. His lips were cool but impossibly soft, moving against hers with careful patience. Seren had imagined kisses before, had wondered what they would feel like, but nothing had prepared her for this, for the sensation of his tongue tracing the seam of her lips, for the way her entire body seemed to ignite despite the cold, for the desperate, aching need that built in her chest with every passing second. His hands roamed her body, learning her curves, her sensitive places. Every touch left trails of cold fire on her skin. When his fingers brushed the inside of her thigh, Seren gasped, her hips arching involuntarily. So responsive, Theron murmured against her throat. So warm. Is that good? It's intoxicating. They came together slowly, carefully. There was a moment of sharp discomfort that made Seren tense, but Theron stilled immediately, giving her time to adjust, whispering reassurances against her hair. And then the discomfort faded. replaced by something else entirely. Something that built and built until she was gasping, clutching at his shoulders, calling his name as the world shattered around her. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the furs, both breathing hard. Theron's arm was wrapped around her waist, holding her close despite the cold. She could feel his heart pounding against her back. That was... Seren couldn't find the words. Worth remembering? Theron asked quietly. Yes. She turned in his arms, facing him. But Theron, your skin got even colder. Like ice. He tensed. Did it hurt you? No, but it worried me. She touched his face, and he flinched at the warmth of her palm. What's happening to you? For a long moment, he didn't answer. His eyes searched her face, and she saw him wrestling with something. A desire to confess, perhaps. Fighting against years of guarded silence. Not tonight, he said finally. Ask me again someday. When we know each other better. It wasn't a no. It was a promise. Serene accepted it. She was drifting toward sleep when she felt him move. Felt the cold recede as he slipped from the bed. She heard him dressing in the darkness. Theron? He paused. Yes? You don't have to leave. A long silence. Then, very quietly, it's better if I do. The cold. It gets worse while I sleep. I don't want to hurt you. But even as he said it, she heard the reluctance in his voice. The loneliness. Before she could respond, she heard his footsteps cross the room. The door opened, closed. And Seren lay alone in the massive bed, wondering what secrets the Lycan king carried that made him so afraid of his own body. Days passed, then weeks. Seren settled into her new life with a speed that surprised her. The castle that had seemed so imposing began to feel like home. The servants who had watched her with suspicion slowly warmed, won over by her kindness and lack of pretension. And Emmerich. Emmerich flourished. The silent, hollow-eyed child who had claimed her at the rejection hall was transforming before everyone's eyes. He spoke now, not constantly, not to everyone, but to her. Always to her. He laughed when she tickled him. He cried when she had to leave him with the nurses. He followed her everywhere, his small hand permanently attached to hers. The first time he called her Mama, Seren froze mid-step. They were in the garden, watching butterflies dance among the roses. Emmerich had spotted a particularly vibrant one and tugged at her skirt. Mama, look! The word hit her like a physical force. Her throat closed. Her eyes burned. What did you call me? She whispered. Emmerich looked up at her with those dark, knowing eyes. Mama, he repeated, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. You're my mama now. Seren knelt down, gathering him into her arms, holding him so tightly he squeaked in protest. Yes, she managed through the tears streaming down her face. Yes, sweetheart, I'm your mama now. By the third time he said it, she'd accepted it as truth. She was his mother now, in every way that mattered. The council is concerned, Theron said one evening, watching her read to Emmerich by the fire. They think you're coddling him, making him dependent. The council can go hang themselves, Seren replied cheerfully, not looking up from the book. Theron made a sound that might have been a laugh. It was happening more often now. These almost laughs. These almost smiles. The ice that surrounded him seemed to thin whenever he was near her, and sometimes, just sometimes, she caught glimpses of the man beneath, a man who was desperately lonely, a man who watched his son with such aching love it made her chest hurt, a man who came to her chambers every night, though the contract only required airs, not affection. The first few nights he'd left immediately afterward, dressed in the darkness and disappeared before she could reach for him. But gradually, that changed. One night he stayed long enough to catch his breath. The next, he lingered while she traced patterns on his cold skin. The night after that, he fell asleep beside her. Seren woke at midnight to find him shivering uncontrollably, frost spreading across the sheets, his skin so cold it burned. She'd built up the fire until the room was sweltering, piled furs on top of him, and held him until the shaking stopped. In the morning, he'd looked at her with something like wonder. "You stayed," he said. "Of course I stayed. Most people would have run. I'm not most people." Her warmth, he told her later, made the cold bearable, made sleeping possible without freezing the entire room. She became his fire long before she ever reclaimed her magic. After that, he stopped leaving. They fell into a routine. Days spent with Emmerich, lessons, games, walks through the castle gardens. Evenings in Theron's study, where she discovered he actually valued her opinion on matters of state. Nights tangled together in her chambers, generating heat to combat his unnatural cold. It wasn't love. Seren reminded herself of that constantly. The contract was clear. He would never love her. She shouldn't love him, but she was falling anyway. She felt it in the way her pulse quickened when he entered a room, in the way she craved his touch even when they weren't in bed, in the way his rare smiles made her feel like the sun had broken through clouds. One evening, a month into their marriage, Seren was playing with Emmerich in the garden when the boy suddenly went rigid. "Emmerich?" Seren knelt beside him. "What's wrong?" His eyes had gone glassy, unfocused. His small body trembled. "Cold," he whispered. "Papa's getting cold." "Your father is always cold, sweetheart." "No." Emmerich shook his head violently. "Colder. Too cold. It's going to freeze him all the way through." Seren's blood turned to ice. "What do you mean?" "Emmerich, what do you see?" But the boy just stared at nothing, tears streaming down his cheeks. "The ice is eating him," Emmerich whispered. "From the inside. It's been eating him for a long, long time. And one day, it's going to win." That night, Seren couldn't sleep. She lay in Theron's arms, feeling the cold radiating from his skin, thinking about what Emmerich had said. The ice is eating him from the inside. It sounded like madness, like the confused ramblings of a traumatized child. But Emmerich saw things. Theron had said so himself. His mother had believed it was a gift. What if it was true? What if there was something inside Theron, something cold and deadly, slowly destroying him? "You're thinking too loud," Theron murmured against her hair. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you." "You didn't. I don't sleep well." He shifted, pulling her closer. "What's troubling you?" Seren hesitated. "Emmerich said something today. Something that worried me." "What did he say?" She felt him tense as she repeated the boy's words. When she finished, the silence stretched so long she thought he might have fallen asleep. Then, very quietly, "He's always been perceptive." "Is it true?" Seren lifted her head, trying to see his face in the darkness. "Is something eating you?" Theron didn't answer. "Theron, there are things about me you don't know," he said finally. "Things I can't tell you. Not yet." "Why not?" "Because knowing might put you in danger." His arm tightened around her. "Because some secrets have teeth, and I won't risk you being bitten by mine." It should have frightened her. It should have made her pull away, demand answers, refuse to be kept in the dark. Instead, she pressed closer. "Then I'll wait," she said quietly, "until you trust me enough to tell me. And if I never do, then I'll love you anyway." The words were out before she could stop them. Her pulse skipped. She hadn't meant to say that. Hadn't meant to confess what she'd barely admitted to herself. The silence that followed was deafening. "Seren," Theron said slowly. "You shouldn't—" "I know. I know I shouldn't." She laughed bitterly. The contract was clear. No love, no attachment, just airs and appearances. She pulled back slightly, enough to look at his shadowed face. "But I can't control what I feel, and what I feel is—" "Don't." His voice was strained. "Please don't say it again." "Why not?" Because I can't give you what you want. He sat up abruptly, and the cold intensified, making her shiver. I told you from the beginning, I will never love you. I can't love you. Can't or won't? Both. He stood, moving toward the window, his back to her. In the moonlight, she could see frost spreading across his shoulders, creeping down his arms. Theron. My father loved my mother, he said quietly. Truly loved her. And it killed him. Seren's breath caught. The kings of Valdrin carry a curse. Theron continued, his voice hollow. An ancient magic laid on my bloodline generations ago. We are forbidden from love, if we allow ourselves to feel it, to truly feel it. He turned to face her, and in the moonlight, she saw something terrible in his eyes. The cold comes. It freezes our hearts. It kills us, slowly and painfully. Everything she thought she understood shifted and rearranged itself. That's why you've been getting colder, Seren whispered. That's why Emmerich said the ice was eating you. Theron nodded once. You're already dying. Her voice cracked. You're already in love with someone and it's killing you. He didn't deny it. Who? Seren demanded, something sharp and jealous twisting in her chest. Who do you love? The late queen? Is that why? No. The word was torn from him. Not Isolde. I cared for her, respected her, but I never loved her. Not like... He stopped, looked at her, and Seren understood. Me, she breathed. You love me. Theron's face crumpled. I tried not to. Gods know I tried. But you're so warm, Seren. So kind. So impossibly, infuriatingly good. And Emmerich loves you, and I love watching you with him. And every day I fall a little deeper. And every day the cold gets worse. And I... He broke off, pressing his hand to his chest. Seren was out of the bed in an instant, crossing to him, taking his face in her hands. Then we break it, she said fiercely. The curse. We find a way to break it. There is no way. My ancestors searched for centuries. There's no cure. There's no hope. There's only the cold, and eventually, the cold wins. I don't believe that. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. I won't believe that. I just found you. I just found a life worth living. I won't let some ancient curse take you from me. Theron looked at her with such devastation, such love, such fear. Seren, he whispered, my beautiful, stubborn, impossible wife. And then he kissed her. It was different from every kiss that had come before. Desperate, consuming. The kiss of a man who knew he was dying and wanted to feel alive, just for one moment. Seren kissed him back with everything she had. She would find a way. She had to. She had magic in her blood, even if it was bound. She had a sister who owed her answers. She had resources she'd never had before. The curse had taken Theron's ancestors. It would not take him. She would die before she let that happen. 3 days passed after Theron's revelation. 3 days of Seren watching him with new eyes, seeing the curse in every shiver, every moment when his skin turned a shade too pale, every night when the cold grew so intense that frost crept across the bedsheets. 3 days of desperate research. She'd commandeered a section of the castle library, pulling every book that mentioned curses, bloodlines, or ancient magic. The servants whispered about the new queen who spent her nights surrounded by dusty tomes instead of sleeping beside her husband. Let them whisper. She didn't care. You need to rest, Theron said on the 3rd evening, finding her slumped over a stack of books in the library. Emmerich was asleep in the nursery, watched over by nurses who had grown to adore him almost as much as Seren did. I'll rest when I find something useful. Seren. He knelt beside her chair, taking her hands in his cold ones. Generations of my ancestors searched for a cure. Scholars, mystics, witches from every corner of the realm. None of them found anything. Then they weren't looking hard enough. Or there's nothing to find. Seren pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. I won't accept that. I can't accept that. Why? Theron rose with her, his pale eyes searching her face. Why does this matter so much to you? We've known each other barely 2 months. The contract was clear from the beginning. Damn the contract! The words exploded from her with more force than she intended. Damn your terms and your conditions and your rules about never loving me. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to steady herself. Don't you understand? It's too late for rules. It's too late for contracts. I love you, Theron. Not because I'm supposed to, not because of any arrangement. I love you because you're kind when you don't have to be. Because you gave me safety when I had nothing. Because you look at your son like he's the entire world, and you look at me like I might be part of it too. Her vision blurred with emotion. I love you because you're dying, and you're still more worried about my feelings than your own life. I love you because... She never finished the sentence. Theron crossed the distance between them in 2 strides and kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't careful. It was desperate and consuming and tasted like goodbye. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something she'd never seen before. Fear, joy, devastation, love. I love you too, he said hoarsely. I've been trying not to say it, trying not to feel it, but I can't anymore. I can't pretend that my heart doesn't belong to you, Seren. Every frozen piece of it. Her heart soared, and then she saw it, the frost spreading across his face. Theron. His hand flew to his chest. His eyes went wide with pain. No, he gasped. Not yet. Not so fast. I thought I had more time. His knees buckled. Seren caught him, barely managing to slow his fall as he collapsed to the library floor. His body convulsed, his skin turning white as marble, frost crystallizing on his eyelashes. Help! Seren screamed. Someone help me! Footsteps thundered in the corridor. Guards burst through the doors, followed by servants, advisors, the castle physician. The king! Someone shouted. Get the healers, now! Chaos erupted around her, but Seren barely registered it. She was too focused on Theron's face, on the way his lips were turning blue, on the desperate flutter of his pulse beneath her fingers. Stay with me, she begged. Please, Theron, stay with me. His eyes found hers. Even now, even dying, he was looking at her like she was something precious. Worth it, he whispered. Loving you. Worth it. His eyes closed. His body went still. And Seren screamed. They moved Theron to his chambers. The royal physicians worked through the night, but nothing helped. The cold radiating from his body was so intense that ice formed on the walls around him. His heartbeat slowed to a crawl. His breath came in shallow gasps that grew weaker with each passing hour. He's freezing from the inside out, the head physician said grimly. Some kind of magical curse. There's nothing we can do. Nothing they could do. The words echoed in Seren's skull as she sat beside Theron's bed, clutching his frozen hand, watching frost creep slowly across his chest. She'd done this. Her love had done this. If she'd kept her distance, if she'd maintained the cold arrangement he'd originally proposed. But no, she couldn't regret loving him. She could only regret not finding a way to save him. Emmerich appeared in the doorway at dawn, his small face streaked with tears. A guard stood helplessly behind him, clearly having failed to keep the boy away. Mama? His voice was barely a whisper. Is Papa going to die? Seren pulled him onto her lap, holding him close, feeling his warmth against the cold that seemed to permeate everything now. I won't let him, she said fiercely. I'll find a way to save him. I promise. Emmerich looked up at her with those 2 knowing eyes. You have fire, he said quietly. Inside you. I can see it. Seren's heart stopped. What did you say? Fire. Silver fire. It's locked up, but it's there. He pressed his small hand against her chest. Right here. Sleeping. If you woke it up, maybe it could melt the ice. Moonfire. her magic. The gift that had been sealed away, branded as shameful, used as evidence of her supposed crimes. What if it wasn't a curse at all? What if it was the key? Emmerich! Seren gripped his shoulders. Can you see how to wake it up? Can you see how to break the lock? The boy's brow furrowed with concentration. There's a thing. A seal. Someone else has it. Someone who smells like you but wrong. Her father. Lord Rendell had the binding seal. He'd used it to lock away her magic when she was 13 years old. If she could get it back. If she could break the binding. But would Moonfire even work against the curse? She was grasping at straws, desperate for any hope. Theron's eyes fluttered open. Seren. His voice was barely audible. She leaned close, her face wet with tears. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. Cold. His breath misted in the air. So cold. I know. But I'm going to fix it. I'm going to find a way. There's no way. His frozen fingers twitched against hers. I told you. The curse can't be broken. Maybe it can be melted. Theron's eyes focused on her face, confused. I'm a Moonfire witch, Seren said. My magic was bound when I was 13, but it's still in me. Emmerich can see it. If I can get the seal, if I can break the binding, maybe my fire can counter your ice. Hope flickered in his eyes, then died. Your magic is bound, he said. And even if it wasn't, Moonfire is dangerous, uncontrollable. You were branded because... I was branded because my father wanted to be rid of me. Seren's voice hardened. I never killed anyone. My magic was sealed before Eric died. Someone else used Moonfire that night. Someone else committed that murder and let me take the blame. Theron stared at her. Seren, if that's true. It's true. My sister confirmed it. She pressed his hand against her cheek, ignoring the burning cold. I need you to know this before I try anything. I need you to know what I am. What I really am. She pulled back her sleeve, exposing the crescent brand for the first time. I'm a bound witch, she said. Branded as a murderer. Condemned by my own father. Everything you were warned about, everything you were taught to fear, that's what I am. She waited for his expression to change, for disgust or horror or doubt to creep into his eyes. Instead, his frozen fingers reached up to trace the brand with heartbreaking gentleness. Beautiful, he whispered. Theron. I've seen your heart, Seren. I've watched you with my son. I've felt your warmth against my cold. His thumb traced the edge of the crescent scar. This mark doesn't define you. It never did. She wept openly. You should hate me, she choked out. You should be repulsed. Maybe if you were, the curse would... Would what? Reverse? He laughed weakly, the sound catching in his frost-covered throat. That's not how it works. The curse doesn't care if love is returned. It only cares that it exists. His eyes met hers with devastating clarity. And I love you, Seren. Brand and all. Secrets and all. I will love you until this ice finally claims me, and nothing you reveal will change that. His hand fell from her face, his eyes closed, and the frost spread further, creeping up his neck toward his jaw. Seren stood abruptly, her chest tight with desperate determination. She couldn't break his love, couldn't save him by making him hate her. There was only one option left. She had to get her magic back. The ride to her father's estate took 4 hours. Seren pushed her horse hard, flanked by royal guards who had orders to bring Lord Rendell to justice if necessary. Marin had sent word ahead. She would be waiting. She would help. She had something important to reveal. The sun was setting when Seren arrived, painting the sky in shades of blood and fire. Appropriate colors for what was about to happen. Marin met her at the gates, her face pale but determined. He's in his study, Marin said quickly. He doesn't know you're coming. He's been drinking since the wedding, convinced the king will destroy him eventually. He's right. Seren dismounted, striding toward the house with purpose burning in her chest. The guards followed, their armor clanking in the evening quiet. She didn't knock. The study door slammed open, and Lord Rendell looked up from his whiskey with bloodshot eyes. A fire crackled in the hearth behind him. Empty bottles littered his desk. "You," he snarled, rising unsteadily. "How dare you come into my home? The seal." Seren's voice was ice and iron. "Where is it?" "What seal?" "I don't know what you're—" "The binding seal. The one you used to lock away my magic when I was 13 years old." She advanced on him, and he stumbled backward, knocking over his chair. "I know you have it. I know you've kept it all these years. Give it to me. Now." Rendell's face twisted with familiar hatred. "So you can murder someone else? So you can finish what you started with Eric?" "I didn't kill Eric." The words cut through the room like a blade. Rendell froze. "My magic was bound before Eric died," Seren continued, her voice deadly calm. "You bound it yourself, the day after it manifested. Which means I couldn't have killed him with Moonfire. Which means someone else did. That's not— Who else in this family carries Moonfire magic, Father?" Seren stepped closer. "Who else could have produced silver flames that night?" The color drained from Rendell's face. "You," Seren said. "Grandmother was a Moonfire witch. You inherited her power. You've hidden it your whole life, just like you hid everything else about our family." "Shut up," Rendell hissed, backing toward the fireplace. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know you killed Mother." The words tore from Seren's throat. "I know you banished her for an affair that never happened, blamed her for magic that came from your own bloodline, and I know you killed Eric. He wasn't good enough for Marin." The confession exploded from Rendell with startling force, years of suppressed guilt and rage finally breaking free. "A commoner, a nobody, sniffing around my daughter like she was some tavern wench. I warned him to stay away, but he wouldn't listen. He kept coming back, kept filling her head with dreams of running away together." Marin made a choked sound from the doorway, her hand flying to her mouth. "So you killed him," Seren said flatly, "and you blamed me." "Two birds with one stone." Rendell's voice had gone cold, his initial panic fading into something uglier, defiant. "I rid my family of an unsuitable match and the shameful reminder of our witch blood, all in one night." Marin staggered forward, her face white with horror. "You murdered him," she breathed. "Eric, the man I loved. You murdered him and let me hate my own sister for years." "I did what was necessary to protect this family's reputation." "You destroyed this family." Marin's voice rose to a scream. "You killed an innocent man. You framed your own daughter. You drove away our mother and let her die in exile." Rendell's eyes flickered to the door, calculating his escape. The guards blocked his path. He turned toward the window instead. Marin's fist connected with his jaw. The crack echoed through the study. Rendell stumbled backward, tripping over the fallen chair, crashing to the floor. His head struck the edge of his desk as he fell, and he went limp. Silence descended. Seren stared at her sister across their father's unconscious body. "The seal," Marin said, her voice shaking but resolved. "He keeps it in the locked drawer. The key is around his neck." Seren knelt, finding the chain, pulling the small iron key free. She moved to the desk, opened the drawer, and there it was. A small silver disc etched with the crescent moon. The binding seal that had imprisoned her magic for over a decade. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. "Will it work?" Marin asked. "Your magic? Will it really save the king?" "I don't know." Seren closed her fingers around the seal. "But it's the only chance he has." She turned to leave, then paused. "The guards will take father into custody. He'll face trial for Eric's murder and mother's banishment." She looked at Marin, at this sister who had hated her for so long. "I'll need you to testify." Marin nodded, her face wet with tears. I will. I'll tell them everything. She caught Seren's arm. I'm sorry. For all of it. For believing him. For blaming you. For every cruel word. Later. Seren squeezed her sister's hand briefly. We'll talk later. Right now, I have a king to save. She mounted her horse and rode through the night, the seal burning like hope against her palm. The castle was in chaos when Seren arrived. Servants ran through the corridors with blankets and warming stones. Healers shouted orders. Guards stood helpless outside the king's chambers, their faces grim. How is he? Seren demanded, pushing through the crowd. Worse, Your Majesty. The head physician's face was gray with exhaustion. The ice has spread to his heart. He has hours at most. Hours. Seren burst into Theron's chambers. The cold hit her like a physical wall. Frost covered every surface, the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The fire in the hearth had died, overwhelmed by the magical chill. And on the bed, barely visible beneath layers of ice, lay Theron. His eyes were closed. His chest barely moved. He looked like a statue carved from winter itself. Everyone out, Seren commanded. Your Majesty, we can't leave you alone with... Out. Now. Something in her voice brooked no argument. The healers retreated, the servants fled, the guards pulled the doors closed behind them. Seren stood alone with her dying husband. She pulled the binding seal from her pocket, staring at the silver disc with its crescent moon marking. For over a decade, this small object had imprisoned her magic, had defined her as dangerous, criminal, and shameful. Now, it was her only hope. Please work, she whispered. Please, please work. She pressed her thumb against the center of the seal and spoke the words her grandmother had whispered to her, in dreams she'd never understood until now. By blood and moon, I break this binding. By fire and will, I claim what's mine. The seal shattered in her hand, and the magic came flooding back. It was like being struck by lightning, like drowning and breathing for the first time simultaneously. Silver fire erupted from her skin, racing along her veins, filling every empty space inside her with blazing warmth. Moonfire, her birthright, her salvation. Seren gasped, overwhelmed by the sensation, by the power that had been locked away for so long. The fire wanted to explode outward, to consume everything in its path. It took all her concentration to contain it, to shape it, to direct it toward the frozen figure on the bed. She climbed onto the mattress, ice cracking beneath her knees. She pressed her burning palms against Theron's frozen chest, and she let the fire pour into him. At first, nothing happened. The ice was ancient, powerful, fed by generations of curse magic. Her moonfire crashed against it like waves against a cliff, and Seren felt despair threatening to swallow her whole. It wasn't enough. She wasn't enough. Mama. Emmeric's voice came from the doorway. The boy had slipped past the guards again, his dark eyes wide and shimmering with that strange second sight. The fire needs something to burn, he said quietly. Give it something. Give it what? Emmeric placed his small hand over his heart. Love. The curse eats love. So feed the fire with it too. Understanding crashed over Seren like a wave. The curse fed on love, twisted it, and used it to create ice. But love could also fuel fire. Seren closed her eyes and stopped fighting. Stopped trying to control the flames. Instead, she opened herself completely. Every memory, every feeling, and every moment of connection she'd shared with the man beneath her hands. The way he'd defended her at their wedding. The way he'd kissed her hand instead of demanding to see her face. The way he'd held her through the night, shivering with cold but refusing to let go. The way he'd looked at her when he'd confessed his love, knowing it would kill him, saying the words anyway. She loved him. Desperately, completely, irrevocably. And she poured every ounce of that love into the moonfire. The flames turned white hot. The ice screamed as it melted, releasing centuries of frozen pain into the air. Steam filled the chamber, obscuring everything. Seren kept burning, kept pouring, kept loving, until finally beneath her hands she felt it. A heartbeat. Strong and steady and warm. The ice shattered. Theron's eyes flew open, and they weren't pale anymore. They were blue, deep, vivid, alive. Seren? His voice was hoarse but strong. His hand came up to cup her face, and for the first time since she'd known him, his skin was warm. What happened? How did you— I broke it. She wept openly now. The curse. I think I broke it. Theron sat up slowly, looking at his hands, his arms, and his chest where her palms still rested. No frost. No ice. No deadly cold. That's impossible, he breathed. Generations of my family tried. They didn't have moonfire. Seren laughed through her tears. They didn't have me. Theron stared at her for one long, incredulous moment. Then he kissed her. It was nothing like their previous kisses. There was no cold, no desperation, and no shadow of death hanging over them. This kiss was pure warmth, pure joy, pure love finally freed from its frozen prison. When they broke apart, Emmerich had climbed onto the bed and was squeezing between them, his small face bright with happiness. "Papa's warm now," he announced. "Mama fixed him." Theron pulled them both close, his son and his wife, his family. "Yes," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Mama fixed everything." 6 months later, Seren stood in the sunlit courtyard of the Royal Academy for the Magical Arts, watching young witches and wizards practice their craft under the guidance of experienced teachers. The Academy had been Theron's first royal decree after his recovery. No more binding, no more branding, no more treating magical children as criminals for the circumstances of their birth. Seren was its patron and principal benefactor. "Mama, watch me." Emmerich ran past, silver sparks trailing from his fingertips. He'd inherited the Moonfire gift, diluted through his father's bloodline but present nonetheless. The teachers said he would be powerful someday. "I'm watching, sweetheart," Seren called, one hand resting on her swelling belly. Another child. A daughter this time, according to the midwives. A princess for Valdrin, who would never know the shame of hidden magic or the fear of curses waiting to strike. Because the curse was broken. Not just for Theron, but for the entire bloodline. The royal physicians had confirmed it. Whatever Seren had done that night in the frozen chamber had shattered the ancient magic completely. Emmerich would never suffer as his father had. Neither would any of his descendants. Love was no longer forbidden for the kings of Valdrin. "There you are." Warm arms wrapped around her from behind, and Seren leaned into her husband's embrace. "You're supposed to be in the council meeting," she murmured. "The council can wait." "I wanted to see you." Theron pressed a kiss to her hair. "Besides, they were only discussing Lord Rendell's sentencing. I've already made my decision." Seren tensed slightly. "And?" "Life imprisonment in the southern fortress. Comfortable, but isolated. He'll never hurt you or anyone else again." It was more mercy than her father deserved, but Seren had asked for it. Not for his sake, but for Marin's. Her sister had testified at the trial, had helped secure Rendell's conviction, and was slowly rebuilding her relationship with Seren. Executing their father felt like too much salt in wounds that were only beginning to heal. "Thank you," Seren said quietly. "Don't thank me. Thank Marin for advocating so eloquently. She has a gift for persuasion." Theron turned her in his arms, his blue eyes, still startling in their warmth after so many months, searching her face. "Are you happy?" Seren considered the question. 6 months ago, she'd stood in a rejection hall, certain she would be sold to the mines, and certain no one would ever want her. She'd been branded, abandoned, blamed for a murder she didn't commit. She'd expected nothing but suffering for the rest of her short life. Now she was queen of a kingdom that celebrated magic instead of fearing it. Mother to a boy who had chosen her before anyone else. Wife to a man who loved her with a warmth that had replaced a lifetime of cold. And her shame, the moonfire magic that had marked her as dangerous, had saved them all. "Yes," she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "I'm happy." Emmerich barreled into them, wrapping his arms around both their legs, laughing as Theron scooped him up and spun him around. "Family hug," the boy demanded. Seren laughed, joining the embrace, feeling the warmth of her husband and son surrounding her. They had let her fall. Her father, her pack, everyone who should have protected her. But in falling, she had found something better than she ever could have imagined. She had found home. She had found love. She had found exactly where she was meant to be. And she would never let anyone make her fall again. Thank you for listening to this story. If you enjoyed it, please let me know in the comments below. I read every single one, and they mean more than you know.